Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to GWI's Connecting the Dots 2021 event. Someday soon, I hope it will be possible to welcome you back to GWI's offices around the world and share these insights with you in person. For now though, we've put together a jam-packed digital event for you today, where we'll be showcasing the very best of our Connecting the Dots report. For those of you who don't know, Connecting the Dots is our annual trends piece, where we look ahead and anticipate the stories which will matter most to marketers, planners, and strategists. You are very welcome to download a free copy of the report from our website, and in there you'll find our latest thinking on a very wide range of themes, everything from mental health and sustainability through to data usage attitudes and generational shifts. Today though, we've got an absolute treat in store for you as we preview 3 of the key themes from the report. First, in a second, I'll be handing over to our trends team, where they'll be looking at implications for e-commerce amidst the rise of live streaming. They'll be asking what's the future in terms of remote and flexible working. And they'll be asking what's happening to brand purpose and brand equity amidst the ongoing pandemic crisis. After that, I'm delighted to say that we'll be joined by industry experts from Facebook, LinkedIn, and First Consulting. We'll be capturing their views, their thoughts, their reactions to the stories that we're going to present to you just now. So without further ado, I am delighted to hand over to the wonderful Katie Gilson and Chris Beer from GWI's Trends team, who will take you through our 3 key stories.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you to everyone for attending today. My name's Chris, and I'm the Market Intelligence Manager at GWI. I'm joined today by my colleague Katie, who's our Consumer Insights Manager.
Hi, everybody.
We're going to run you through a preview of our report, Connecting the Dots, concentrating on a handful of trends we think will shape the years to come, and offering up some suggestions and talking points about how they might factor into planning for next year and beyond. And if you'd like to join the conversation on Twitter, please share your questions and comments with the hashtag CTD21. Now, when we were putting this little presentation together, we thought for quite a long time about how to introduce it. I mean, how on earth do you try and make sense of the year that we've just collectively experienced? Well, one thing you can do is take a step back and see where it sits in a historical context. One of my lockdown projects this year has been trying to get better at coding and web scraping and so on, and I had to go at scraping Wikipedia for some information or try and come up with a way of visualizing it. Now, as you probably know, Wikipedia has a different page for pretty much every year in human history with a list of events that took place in it, which essentially means all the events that the site's editors deem worthy of including, not including births or deaths. Now, the figure we have for 2020 is a projection based on its current rate of events, so to speak. And there tends to be a bit of a bias towards recent years, but with just over a month left to go, you can see that 2020, or its projected rate of events, is set to become easily the most eventful year of my lifetime, and up there with some of the most eventful in human history. I mean, years like 1967 and 1989, which are very well known. So the year as a whole might not be as completely, as unprecedented as many were saying a few months ago, but it's still a year where an awful lot has happened and we need to sift through and pick the pieces of. And I find this little visualization a good way of understanding how 2020 panned out, because there's a clear before and after stage in how the year went on. So if you look at the popularity of Google searches for back to normal versus new normal, you can see that when COVID-19 first spread around the world in March and April time, the initial reaction from most people was wondering when things were going to get back to normal, when normal service was going to be resumed. But within a month or two, it seems like virtually everyone realizes that that old normal has gone and thinking, well, what on earth does this new normal look like? And hopefully some of the things we discussed today will add some detail to that picture and help try and pick out some detail to those unknowns. One thing that does have to be said, though, is that this eagerness to move on to a new normal depends a great deal on where you are. Here in the UK, for example, we seem to be the most nostalgic the way things were. We wanted to put this forward because this is a global pandemic, but its outcomes are going to differ wildly across countries for a whole host of reasons. And it's the similar kind of insight we get through our own harmonized 46 country research at GWI. The trends that we've contained in the report and we'll talk through today will, for the most part, hold globally, but there will be differences depending on where you're based. The other big wildcard, of course, and something we've heard a lot about in recent weeks, is the efficacy and distribution of potential vaccines. So in the report, we've offered different ways to apply these trends depending on the best or worst case scenarios of the pandemic. Anyway, I'm now going to pass you over to Katie, who will take you through the first of our chosen trends.
Thanks so much for that, Chris. And hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So like many other people, we've been working from home since March, and it's pretty unclear when we're going to go back to the office or even what that's going to look like when we do return. And we're sure that this is a common problem for many companies and employees right now. Netflix's CEO recently said that working from home is a pure negative, while Twitter has said its employees can work from home forever. So clearly there's two camps here, and many companies and employees will want different things. And I think that's really the crux of this trend, and is something that has often been overlooked. So remote working may be widespread, and it's so widely talked about as well, but flexible working, which from our data we know is something employees crave, has barely shifted. So companies really need to take a step back and see that remote working is only one small part of a much broader picture in the future of work, which is something that we're going to dig into a little further now. So for so long, the idea of a good work-life balance was often defined of in terms of time. So clocking off at 5, making sure that you leave on time, not working late. But in reality, the notion of what a good work-life balance isn't so straightforward. So since 2019, the number of workers who say they always work late and say they've got a good work-life balance has actually grown considerably. And this really challenges the idea of maintaining fixed boundaries that have long been considered the norm. And we can really see just how much a good work-life balance impacts employee satisfaction and productivity than those who don't. But their happiness isn't tied to leaving on time or not being reachable outside of work hours, as employees with a good work-life balance are actually more likely to say they're always contactable outside of work time. And obviously employee wants and needs will differ, but it really comes down to offering a level of flexibility to employees. So whether this involves setting their own day or work week schedule, or whether it means working a few hours on the weekend instead if they wished. It's given them that increased freedom, essentially, to work in the way that's most effective for them and could be really key in fostering productivity and happiness as we move forward. But flexible working, as we mentioned at the beginning, is really lagging behind. So while the pandemic has greatly accelerated remote working, we can see from our data it's hardly nudged the move to flexible working. So since 2019, workers are only 5% more likely to say they work more flexible hours, compared to 32% who say they work more from home. So there's plenty of room to catch up. 2021 is not going to be an easy ride, that's for sure. Working environments will still be in limbo, but it's vital that leaders ensure they can replicate the spirit of the workplace, preserve and enhance company culture, and really ensure that recognition continues regardless of where employees are working from. And we can see again that those who have a good work-life balance are far more likely to feel empowered to make strategic decisions, to feel aligned with company values, and to have a clear understanding of how their day-to-day contributes to company strategy than those who don't. The difference really is striking. And this comes down to having regular and open, clear communication, as well as encouraging employees to explore new ideas and foster innovation. Driving productivity and satisfaction involves loosening that grip on the 9-to-5 work week that has long been considered standard, putting flexibility into the hands of employees and really driving a culture of empowerment. And we feel this is what will set companies apart as we begin to tackle 2021 head on. So if I can leave you with 3 things, it's this: the 9-to-5 doesn't equal a healthy work-life balance. We really have to look beyond the idea of having those fixed boundaries. Flexible working will become even more important in influencing the future of work, regardless of where employees work from. And companies need to focus on employee empowerment to really harness productivity and satisfaction. All right, so next up, we've got a trend that's all about kindness and empathy as driving forces in 2021. Just to frame things a little bit for you and put some context behind this, we've really come such a long way from Friedman's view on the role of business in society, which for him at the time was plain and simple: to increase profits. This has drastically changed over the past 50 years, and businesses now recognize that it must consider its impact on the people and the planet. And this has never been more true than in 2020. From the Black Lives Matter movement to COVID-19, 2020 has really shone a spotlight on brand purpose and what this actually means. You know, we've seen companies rush to support the Black Lives Matters movement in various different ways. We've seen companies of all kinds do their bit to help people during the pandemic, whether that's creating sanitizer or making large scale donations or offering financial support, the list goes on. But brand purpose is so much more than this at its core. It's about showing consumers that you care in whatever way that you can. And it really is often the little things that have a very big impact, especially as the financial and mental health toll of the pandemic continues into next year. So asking consumers what they want from brands almost always results in price or quality being the top factors. So the fact that supporting people during COVID-19 is out on top really highlights the importance consumers place on getting support from brands right now and where brands can step it up. The fact is that consumers have long wanted and valued brands supporting social causes or championing sustainability. I mean, who wouldn't? But since the pandemic, it's smaller acts of kindness, specifically focused on supporting individual consumers through these really tough times that are the most important. And there's a lot of opportunity to win or to lose consumers through these smaller everyday interactions that we often take for granted. And even though typical tools that brands use to distinguish themselves, such as physical retail, for example, have taken a back seat, brands can still increase positive brand sentiment by focusing on the digital experience and the consumer experience and the customer service right now. The top concern that would negatively impact purchases is bad customer service, more than other socially driven or eco-conscious concerns. And this is important because as interactions with consumers increasingly become more digitized and tech will only continue to accelerate into 2021, we really can't overlook the importance of customer services on a company's bottom line. And this could range from providing flexibility in returns or payments, or even something as small as incorporating humor into communications. It's also worth noting that empathy is a driving force in professional settings as well. So half of consumers say that employers should prioritize employees' mental health and make them feel valued. Growing a brand during a pandemic is no easy task, that's for sure. But the outbreak has given companies the opportunity to better engage with consumers and reposition their business amid changing consumer needs and values that go far beyond offering the best product at the best price. These next 12 months, brands need to consider their next stage to the COVID-19 response, bolstering their support of large-scale initiatives and social causes, which many we know are doing right now, with a more empathetic approach to consumers on the ground. As a consumer, how a brand behaves during a time of crisis is really the ultimate test to consumer trust and loyalty, and that's the simple truth. Okay, so I'm going to leave you again with 3 key points. Social responsibility is more than big-scale donations or initiatives. It's the small acts of kindness that count, yet are often underestimated. Consumers on this very rare occasion have placed more importance on getting support from brands than price or quality of a product, and this really speaks volumes. And many brands are no doubt scrambling to figure out how to keep building their brand during this time of crisis, at a time when typical tools they might use aren't possible anymore or have maybe lost relevance. And going into 2021, empathy will be the key tool for any brand. So I'm now going to pass you back over to Chris, who's going to take you through our final trend.
Thank you very much, Katie. Now, brand purpose has got a lot of attention through 2020, as you've just pointed out. In our post-COVID world, there are some more new deal breakers and deal clinchers as part of the purchase process for consumers. Not all of them have got quite the same attention. So how you support consumers will matter an awful lot in 2021, but so too will how you entertain them as they shop. IBM reckon e-commerce has had half a decade's growth in just the 1 year. So there's now much more onus on how to differentiate your brand through online touchpoints and the digital experience. I mean, in basic terms, 2020 has seen demand for e-commerce go through the roof. But 2021 will be more about the next step, which is how brands and retailers are going to stand out when everyone is online. We're most interested in this in the form of live streams, for reasons which we'll get more into a bit later on. Now, live streaming, social shopping, shoppertainment, these are all things that have been discussed and predicted at length for quite some time. For any of the uninitiated among you, we're talking about live video as a platform for brands, retailers, and influencers to generate awareness of products and, in the best scenario, convert them into a sale. So it's not too dissimilar from QVC and other shopping channels, but online rather than on TV. At the moment, it's best known in China, where key opinion leaders, as they call influencers, get audiences in the millions on apps like Kuaishou, Little Red Book, Tmall, and Douyin, which we of course know as TikTok. And there was a well-known collaboration between Kim Kardashian and a streamer called Via on Tmall a couple of years ago, which brought in an audience of millions and sold, I think, 15,000 bottles of perfume in a matter of minutes. Now, of course, we just had Singles Day, which is the big online shopping event in China, and is always a good opportunity to check in with trends and understand where e-commerce and the rest of the world might be heading in a few years' time. And it was obvious in the analysis of the event how much content has become such a big differentiator for retailers. I mean, there's now even mini games over there as well as live streams that help encourage people to buy. But I think as with many facets of online life, that cultural disconnect between ourselves and China has led many to wonder exactly what live streams and live stream shopping represents. I mean, is it really just QVC, the digital age? Is it just something that's specific to China, a little quirk of the market, or is it a promising kind of ad channel? I think really the best way to see it is in the context of what's happening right now in the middle of a pandemic. Basically, there's a kind of deep-rooted psychological need for entertainment, distraction, and very likely socialization as well. And because of COVID and all its subsequent effects, there's now a critical mass behind all this, not just on the consumer side, but the platform side, as you can see. The platforms are going all in on it. And don't forget, of course, that TikTok has that very active commerce layer in its home market of China. There's a whole lot of expertise they can draw on. It really seems that they've pushed the market forward in recent months and will continue to do so. Now, one thing I should address is that this whole section, this trend, is working under the assumption that the e-commerce boom will stick, because it's something we've had confirmed time and time again in our research. So in our last wave of dedicated COVID research in the summer, for example, it was 49% who expected to continue to shop online more frequently after the pandemic. Now, something I don't think is actually touched on very much when we talk about that extra amount of shopping online is that it can sometimes feel a little bit stale. You tend to do it alone, and because of social distancing protocol and so on, what tends to happen is a box just gets anonymously dumped outside your door. And sometimes I think it can seem a little bit unsatisfying, or just that there's something missing. And I think this is a sentiment we're actually going to hear more and more. I mean, if we look at the focus group that is Twitter, you can see references to the kind of thing I mean. Now, I'm not trying to say that live streams are an out-and-out replacement for the mall. I just think that there's certain aspects of consumer psychology that can be maybe a little bit neglected when shopping online at the moment, and live streams help tap into. And of course, the social element is what people would need more than ever. Now, live streams, of course, don't necessarily have to be fronted by influencers or someone with the sort of scale and reach that Via has, but the research we've done really underlines just how primed their followers are to buy from them. And this is the other crucial thing we have to keep in mind in this new normal post-COVID context. Influencers are well placed to provide that sense of social connection, empathy, and humanity that is kind of absent from the buying process online at the moment and much of life besides. I mean, there's a bunch of streamers and content creators I've started following since lockdown hit. And the overwhelming feeling you get just from browsing the comments section sometimes is just gratitude. I mean, it's quite simply people feeling grateful that they've got something to connect around when so much else of life is suspended. So in a sense, the entertainment I've been talking about and the support and compassion from brands that Katie was talking about aren't polar opposites. They can actually complement each other quite nicely. At a very basic level, a lot of people in the world are undergoing some kind of social deficit at the moment, and by being more invisible, more engaged, as these kind of live streams are by default, some level of support is extended. There are a couple of things I should note though. In English-speaking markets, the research we've done tends to show that a more informative approach would work better than pure entertainment. And there's many ways to show particular products in a live stream, and certain products will work better than others. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, and you have to do the due diligence of understanding cultural norms of the country you're in and of your audience. We do think this trend, more than the others we've covered today, and probably more than others in the report, is quite contingent on the progress of vaccines and so on. Live stream shopping will likely emerge at some point, but if there's an early return to normality, we think most people will unleash that pent-up demand into offline stores to celebrate as much as anything. So as we mentioned, this is really just a small sample of everything contained in the report. And if you'd like to read more, please go to our website where you can download the PDF. And please keep the conversation coming on Twitter, where you can share questions or comments with the hashtag CTD21. Anyway, that's all from myself and Katie. Thanks very much for listening. We're now going to let Jason and our panelists get stuck into the meat of these topics and what they represent for the future.
Wow, Chris and Katie, thank you so much for such an excellent and insightful overview. You have given us a lot to be thinking about. And on that note, it seems like an opportune moment to introduce our guests for today. Ty, Devon, Andy, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts on those trends that we just presented. Before we jump into the discussion, can I just ask each of you to say a quick hello to our audience and tell them a little bit about your role? Ty, do you want to go first?
Sure, thanks so much for having us for this conversation. My name is Ty Heath, and I'm director at LinkedIn's B2B Institute. We're a think tank focused on accelerating business-to-business relationships, and we work to investigate how marketing and salespeople can create more value. Really excited to be here.
Great, thanks. Devon?
Hi, happy to be here as well. I'm the CEO and founder of First and First Consulting. We're a boutique strategy, analytics, and research firm really focused on helping brands and agencies to bridge the gap between data, insights, and action.
Awesome. And Andy?
Hi there, my name is Andy Childs. I'm working at Facebook. I work in Berlin in connection planning. I use insight to drive business growth, and I consult the top 100 clients, the management consultants, and the top 6 agency groups.
Fantastic. Welcome one and all. Thank you again for taking the time today. So as many viewers will spot, some of the panelists are dialed in from home. So that seems a natural discussion to start. Let's talk about remote working and what we expect it to bring in the next 12 months. Now, I guess the big question that a lot of people have been wrestling with is, once this pandemic is finally over, are we going to slip back to what we did before, or has this heralded a real moment of change where companies think a little bit differently about how they do things? Now, let's start with a general question. How have you guys found the move to remote working, whether personally or talking about the organizations that you work for? Have there been any surprising positives or learnings that you think you'll be taking forward to the next year?
I can jump in here. So, I mean, I can't believe how quickly time has flown. It's been about 8 months since we've been sheltering in place. And generally, I'm a proponent of the flexibility. I think things moving in this direction are actually a good thing for businesses to embrace. More remote working means more flexibility for families. So there are some silver linings here. We've seen increased innovation around scaled learning and events. So there have been some really good things, I think. And I think the other thing to think about is what hasn't been so easy, right? And for all of us, I think part of what we're talking about today and the report just referenced is this blurring of boundaries for remote workers between your personal and professional life. And then also obviously the disconnect that I feel, and I know all of us feel, we're not being able to see our colleagues on a day-to-day basis. And, I would be remiss, I know we're talking about remote working, if I didn't also talk about briefly what it means for our essential workers and our frontline workers that don't have the opportunity to work remotely. So I think we have a level of privilege. We're all in the same storm, but we don't have the same boats. And so I think the path forward also needs to include a conversation about that.
Absolutely.
Just
Yeah.
to echo, oh,
Sorry, go for it.
just to echo a bit what Ty had referenced, I mean, something fascinating that's happened during this time is that when you remove the office, the physical office from a company, it really illuminates what company culture is, because it helps you really understand, okay, is our culture connected to our values and what we do and who our people are and what they care about? Or is it ping pong tables, beer on tap, and dogs in the office? And something that I've been really proud of during this time is going remote, that my team has still felt very connected. And we've had people start during the pandemic that they've really melded with the team very seamlessly. But at the same time, I love my team, and I think I'm in the privileged position that I've picked my team, but I'd rather hang out with them than most other people in my life. And so I miss them really dearly, and I still feel very connected to them, but I do miss them. But on the bright side, our business has taken quite a hit during this time. And what I will say is that it's given us a lot of freedom to future-proof. And it's been so critical to get our operations together, our employee resources together, educate the team as much as possible during this time, so that we're going to be so much stronger on the other side of this than we were going into it.
Yeah, to your point, there are new starters at GWI that I forget I've never met in person. It's a bizarre situation, isn't it? Andy, how about you?
Yeah, I think there's a number of kind of positives and negatives. I think a lot of them have been addressed. I think Ty's point around, the scale of events and webinars. I think once upon a time, we were bound by time zone or by geography, but now ultimately people can dial in anywhere as a guest and as an attendee. And I think if we think about at least the first lockdown, I think there were two types of people. There were people creating webinars and people listening. Secondly, I think it opens up the talent pool in many ways for companies across the world. So, people who may not live in the kind of big cities, the hubs, now can ultimately apply for the best companies around the world and work remotely. I think that's good for everyone involved. What I do see, and I don't know, how everyone else feels, but working from home has meant, I guess, a closer connection to local communities. So that's about spending time in parks, investing in local businesses, and I guess spending more time with people, remotely near me. I think the downside, again, Ty, I think mentioned this, is that the big question was, am I working from home or am I living at work? This kind of bleeding of personal and work time. I think there's a lot to be said about mental fitness as well. So we've seen, a huge level, increased level of anxiety and stress. And I think this idea of, we're all in this together is a little bit tone deaf. Obviously, that's how we've come from, at least in the beginning. Ultimately, what we've seen is that, COVID has really accelerated inequalities that already existed in our society. Obviously, women taking more time to look after kids than men. They're taking less time for themselves. They're working less. That obviously has an impact on potentially their own careers. We have working class people who, ultimately have not been able to, remote work. I think, we talked about they're either on furlough or they're risking, their health for work and to be paid. We have Black and Asian people, at least in the UK, who are twice as likely to catch COVID, have a greater chance to die. There's, again, in the UK, there's the kind of north-south divide. There's unemployment as well. So, the Bank of England, I think just today said that, the chances is that there'll be unemployment around 10% of the population. And again, younger people aged 16 to 24 are most impacted, of course, as well as those people who are in hospitality and the event industry. So what I would say is that there are definite positives, but I'd say that some people are more impacted by the negatives than other people.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In some of our recent research at GWI, among 16 to 24s and in fact 25 to 34s in countries like the UK and the US, concerns over their mental health rank higher than concerns over things like finding a vaccine. It's clear how profound the impact it's having on younger groups in particular. Ty, I have a question for you. As some viewers hopefully will know, GWI has recently collaborated with the B2BI Institute from LinkedIn, and we've published a joint report looking at how you understand the rising decision maker in B2B contexts, particularly those aged 21 to 40. As part of that research, we found that there were monumental increases in remote working, as you would expect, because companies had no choice, but that they really hadn't seen many increases at all in flexible working, so choosing when you work. So my question for you is, how much do you think B2B professionals and employees generally are craving flexible working? Do you think it's going to become more widespread in the year ahead?
Oh yes, I believe it has to. It has to. All of the, just based on the report that you shared, we're seeing things move in that direction. You know, and I think to the point that was made by both Devin and Andy, like things are already happening. Like things are moving. We're already inside of trends that have been in the works for years. So the train has already really left the station, and what we're seeing is this pandemic is accelerating things that were already in motion. And the desire for flexibility, which is distinct from, you know, just the idea of having a 9 to 5 and what that means. Flexibility, people are looking for the ability to make decisions about how and when to work, where they want to work. Andy just referenced the other untethering of people from a particular location, opening up opportunity. People want that. And in this study, what we've seen is that this new cohort of tech natives that are moving into business decision-making positions wants this level of flexibility in the way that we work. And so just to kind of understand how that thought process is taking place, we've actually defined out, and you think about the betas, each letter of that term that you just described, that 21 to 40, which is millennials plus late Gen Z, is interested in having flexibility that helps us deal with some of the burnout that you see around the blurred boundaries that we're all experiencing. And we're used to kind of that blending of that personal and professional workspace, more informal communications taking place over time. The E for evolving, meaning that people are constantly looking to grow and innovate, that blending of personal and professional brand. The T for tech native, meaning this is the way that this cohort has always communicated from day one. So smartphones being the way that we kind of move, video, wanting our UX and experiences to be more consumer-like. And then A for activism, meaning the expectation that businesses have a North Star when it comes to social justice issues, when it comes to the responsibility of this cohort and the expectation for themselves to contribute to creating a better world for the community. So I say all of that to say that I think flexibility is an underlying foundation to be able to move in this new world we find ourselves in that has been accelerated by the space of the times we're in right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd be interested in everyone's perspective on this. Actually, in the research that we ran, there's very much a shift. Under 40s see this as a chance to reset expectations and demand things that they might have wanted before but never really felt the confidence to ask for. Whereas the over 40 group, by and large, see this as a stopgap before we just get back to normal. I mean, and feel free to jump in on this, anyone, but do you feel that companies can go back to normal and how they used to do things, or is that simply not an option anymore?
I don't think it's an option. I think that there is going to be an immense need to compromise and find a middle ground. And I think that needs to start now. I think, you know, there's so much uncertainty, especially with people who are newer to the workforce, of what is acceptable And I don't think a lot of companies have done a really good job at verbalizing and setting those expectations, which is going to make it harder as things start to return to, I can't believe I'm saying this phrase again, but like the new normal. And I think there needs to be a responsibility on senior leadership to not just say things, but act in those ways. So something I was talking to with an executive the other day is start doing things that you would be annoyed if your employees asked you to go do. If your employee asks you, hey, can I go grab lunch with my friend or my boyfriend, then you'd be like, yes, of course, go grab lunch with them. Why are you asking me that? Then why aren't you going and grabbing lunch with your husband? Why do you feel guilty about that? It's time that senior leaders start acting in the way that they're trying to communicate, because as things start to shift back, it's going to be so confusing for everyone, and there's going to be such a gap in understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Andy, I have a question for you. In our research, there seems to be quite a strong link between companies which are adapting an approach which embraces flexible working, embraces remote working, and those which are able to instill a sense of innovation, agility, and a way to cope with uncertainty among their employees. As we move, hopefully, to the post-COVID world that we're all longing for, how important do you think those qualities are going to be for businesses, particularly things like innovation?
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you asked me before COVID, whether innovation, agility, flexibility were important, I would say that they are important qualities. But, as we've talked about, I think that we've been going through this kind of forced experimentation that's been brought on by COVID, which has led, to ultimately an increase in digital and mobile technology, which is at least 5 years accelerated. And I think that's basically resulted in a higher expectation of consumers, but employees as well. From a consumer lens, I think that this kind of seamless experience between traditional, digital, mobile, in-store commerce, e-commerce, instant delivery, obviously has massive implications, for businesses that are probably siloed, fragmented, and slow. And I think the ability we've seen, particularly with the first wave of the pandemic, the ability to shift supply chains for businesses is so super important. I think probably that companies had one or two routes which were global, and I think now that they need to think about how to build a pandemic-proof brand with multiple supply chains. So I think that those companies that aren't innovative, that don't make quick decisions and act on those decisions, will lose market share. However, what I would say is that we have seen innovation from very traditional companies. Heinz is a couple of 100 years old. Lindt, the chocolate company in Switzerland. These two companies, who've had real legacy, set up their own direct-to-consumer business in a matter of days. What I would say, and I think this is probably the crux of the big shift during COVID, is that the most progressive companies have seen that the lines have blurred in terms of routes to customers. So the question is, you can call one thing advertising and another thing kind of retail rent. I mean, I'd argue, what's the difference between, a paid position on Google or a search listing on Amazon? Is that called advertising? But then we talk about, renting a retail space on a high street, or in a mall, or on a shelf space. And I think flexible, innovative, forward-thinking brands are starting to see kind of costs to reach and acquire customers with a kind of same lens. And I think that means moving money, that some could be moved for advertising, which might move closer to rental. And I think it could go the other way as well. So some things that are for retail rent will go into advertising. So I think that, brands that ultimately structure themselves with a single P&L, with the same objectives, no matter what department you're in, in retail, in advertising, in digital, in traditional, have the same objectives, the same KPIs. And I think we need brands that are innovative ultimately need to work effectively as one team. And I think they are the ones that ultimately can lean into this crisis and succeed in a post-COVID world.
Yeah, it's interesting how often we've all all of us already have talked about blurring of the lines. I feel like that's the theme for this year. Trend after trend, those lines have been blurred. If I can move us to the second topic for discussion, which is brand purpose. Now, there have been some seismic shifts that we're all aware of. I think it's fair to say that consumers increasingly expect and in fact want brands to be taking a meaningful stance on important social issues like the Black Lives Matter movement. I think it's also fair that there are sharpening expectations around how brands should act in regards to sustainability and other issues of the day. But what we've seen coming through in our research, fueled in particular by the pandemic, is this desire for smaller, everyday acts of kindness. Those little gestures that can help consumers through their day in the tough times in which we all have found ourselves over the last year. Devon, I wanted to ask you, is this something that you've seen brands shifting towards, or do you think there's still a lot more space left to travel for them to get to the point where consumers want them to be?
Yeah, I mean, on the macro level, looking at things like diversity and sustainability, brands are definitely making a huge push for this, but I think there's a lot of confusion around what meeting consumer expectations means versus what it means to take things to the next level. We see so many brands that are like, look, we have a Black person in our advertising. Look at how inclusive and diverse we are, which is so absurdly offensive and is the epitome of doing the absolute bare minimum. Brands need to be thinking more about radical diversity and including all different types of people of all different backgrounds, whether it's neurodiversity or physical diversity. But even one of my favorite examples of this is Gucci had done this post, a lipstick ad, and it had this woman who didn't have traditionally lipstick ad teeth, right? They looked like normal people teeth. And it was so interesting because it's like, wow, tooth diversity, who would have ever thought? And brands need to start thinking more in that way rather than what is the bare minimum that I can be doing. But your point around the small acts of kindness could not be more spot on. This time needs to not only be about the big acts, but also what are those small acts of kindness that I can do to put a smile on our consumer's face? What is there something that we can do to make their life incrementally better? And not to turn this into a Heinz advertisement, because this is the second shout out they're getting. So hopefully someone from Heinz is listening. But one of my favorite brand actions during this time is early pandemic. It was harder to get a puzzle than it was to get toilet paper. You could not get a puzzle. Puzzles were like $50 on Amazon. And Heinz released this puzzle that was all red. The whole puzzle was just a sheet of red. And it was just so well done. It was timely. It was giving consumers something they wanted and couldn't get, but it was also playful. And I think people were so afraid to be playful during this time. Another great example was Applebee's, which, for those of you who don't have an Applebee's around, is sort of a chain, but it has kind of this neighborhood type positioning and is known for happy hour. And I think they have like $1 margaritas or something like that. And as they saw people start to do these virtual happy hours over Zoom, they released a set of Zoom backgrounds that made it look like you were at an Applebee's. And it was just a fun way to give consumers and fans of the brand something that just made them smile a little bit. And I think brands have not taken advantage of that in the way that they could at large scale, but there are some that have done it so exceptionally well.
It's interesting, your point about diversity. In some of our GWI research, when we asked about how people want brands to respond to Black Lives Matter movement, in country after country, there was overwhelming support for brands to respond, but what they wanted a brand to do was totally different. So in the UK and the US, there were relatively low figures for showing support on social media, whereas if you went over to India or Brazil or some other emerging markets, that was absolutely top of the list. So I think there are interesting implications for understanding the local market context in your global campaigns and strategies, because consumers expect you to localize it to them, not just get a one-size-fits-all type approach. Andy, I've got a question for you. Whether we're talking about response to the sort of overwhelming issues like sustainability or the Black Lives Matter movement, or to those everyday acts of kindness and gestures, what role do you think an organization like Facebook has to play here?
So I think the one of the charts that you opened with this morning was around, I think I said 288 moments this year. So I guess Facebook tends to be part of a lot of those moments. So ultimately, I think our responsibility and our role is probably multifaceted, both across environmental, social, for large and smaller brands. When it comes to environmental, I think Facebook has a big role. I think Mark Zuckerberg recently talked about committing to net zero emissions across our company, our whole value chain by 2030. In terms of what we've done around emissions, I think we've reduced our emissions by about 75% in 2020. So annual emissions for the average person on our platform are less than the carbon impact of making a cup of coffee. In terms of our data centers, so we buy 100% renewable energy globally. We use wind turbines to power our data centers in Denmark, and ultimately the heat is recycled throughout the local community. In terms of small businesses as well, that's obviously another group that we didn't actually mention earlier, who've been heavily impacted more greatly than larger businesses by COVID. I think Facebook has stepped up. We've offered $100 million in cash grants and ad credits to help SMEs. We've also provided ways to support local businesses with gift cards. We provide obviously the technology for 160 million businesses to connect with their customers. There's 2 billion people on our platforms across WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and Instagram. And recently we've launched, Facebook Shopping and Instagram Shop. So, although COVID may have had an impact on stores closing, we've given brands large and small the ability to keep connected and communicate and sell to their customer base. And more broadly, we're offering ways to engage customers to grow their business during this time throughout the consumer journey, pushing on to demand creation, to acquisition, and also giving a good user journey, a good user experience post-purchase throughout. So these are the number of ways in which I guess our role across, yeah.
It strikes me just how extensive that list is, and it kind of just reflects how many demands there are on companies now.
Can I add one thing to Andy's list? Is I think in particular with Facebook, the role of groups during this time has been so amazing. Facebook Groups has really done an impeccable job at bringing people together and making real impact in local communities, but also in keeping people sane through shared interests and new interests that, has impact for brands later on. As brands in 2021, if you're not doing it currently, need to be thinking about Facebook Groups as a marketing medium. It is going to be so critical because it has just been, such a critical icon of 2020 and the pandemic.
Devin, that's actually a really good point. I didn't mention groups. I think that's a great point. I don't know whether you guys have seen, it's a Facebook group about outside of your window. It was a US group that's kind of materialized, it's kind of become viral, where basically people are kind of bored during the pandemic. They've shared what they're looking at outside their window. And the whole thing, as you said, has become, a support community for many, many people facing challenges or they have a bad day. And I think that, yeah, it's great. Another thing is obviously voice and calling is another area that I guess I haven't talked about, which is able to connect people together across the world for free.
Awesome. Ty, actually, I wanted to ask you, given so many people have been furloughed or sadly made redundant, how has LinkedIn been responding to try and help them through acts of kindness?
Yeah, I think thinking about where we are right now and the ubiquity of social and the ability to connect people, I'm hearing and seeing the same things that Devin and Andy just shared about coming together of community. And on LinkedIn in particular, I've seen companies, as remote working kicked into place in particular, companies and leaders using LinkedIn as a way to communicate with all stakeholders. So when it's by stakeholders, I mean not just shareholders, right? Because I think there's an expectation that we move beyond just taking care of shareholders to taking care of our entire community, our employees, our leaders, our customers. And so in terms of communication, in terms of organizing, in terms of the way that we show up together, I think a lot of it starts with conversation and then that moves to action. And I'm seeing a lot of those conversations, offers for help, even competitors working together to solve problems. At LinkedIn, we've invested in a couple different things to try to move things forward. You may have seen on the platform in the editorial section, we have a permanent listing now for if you need to find a job, here's where the jobs are, right? So we're doing the work leveraging what's called our economic graph, which is a digital map of the global economy, where we can see, you know, where jobs are, what skills are on the rise, what skills are on the decline, and actually help inform public-private partnerships so that we can figure out where we need to invest as a society as we move forward through this time. That we're working with organizations like the World Bank and World Economic Forum to try to inform that. There's also a really great website called opportunity.linkedin.com, which pulls together a lot of this information and resources for folks to move forward during this time. And I mean, I'm really proud of what I'm seeing from brands, from organizations, from leaders pulling together during what has been such a really difficult time. And I think there's a lot of applications for technology to be a catalyst for solving a lot of these challenges. And I think also a responsibility, because tech is also disrupted in a sense. So we need to be responsible for how do we solve and find solutions for the way forward.
Yeah, I feel like we could probably talk about brand purpose for hours, but I'm gonna haul us on to the next topic, which is the rise of e-commerce, something which is impacting every brand, big or small, pretty much every category, every sector, every country needs to be responding to consumer changes here. Now, a lot of the e-commerce adoption this year was forced. It wasn't a behavior made out of choice. It was, there's no alternative but to order things online, and things that started perhaps in the grocery sector have slowly filtered across into other sectors, and behaviors learned there have made people more comfortable with embracing online more fully. And I'm sure we've all heard the claims that e-commerce has just been boosted by 5 or 10 years worth of progress in the last few months. Devon, as I've just said, things have accelerated for everyone. Do you think brands are ready for this shift?
Some are, some aren't. I think it's hard to really ever be ready, right? Because as true in every type of business, but I think particularly in e-commerce, just when you think that you're catching up, one of your competitors comes in with something totally out of left field that not only is a competitive disadvantage for you, but also does wild things for consumer expectations. So I think a few good examples of this looking historically are like, you think of Amazon. No one expected free next day shipping until Amazon made it a thing. There's, you think of, something like Wayfair had done the augmented reality, being able to see furniture in your room far before anyone else had done that. And now that's sort of an expectation when you buy furniture online. Free People did this amazing campaign in like 2012 or something like that, where you could use a particular hashtag on your post and then it would come up on the page of the product on the website so you could see what the product looked like. And now it's an expectation that you can see what a product looks like on real consumers before you buy something like jeans. So yes, a lot of people have done a lot of work, but there is just no room for complacency, even if you feel like you're at the cutting edge, because you never know who is behind you and what they're going to do in terms of totally blowing up consumer expectations.
Yeah, Couldn't agree more. Hi, we've talked a lot about the consumer impact of growing e-commerce, but what's your perspective on how this is going to impact B2B purchase journeys? What's your feeling on, are we going to see sales that used to take place in person shifting more kind of online? And if so, what do you think B2B buyers will respond to most if we're now talking about an online sales process?
Oh yes, I think B2B could learn a lot from B2C as we move forward. And we think about like the Netflixification. Is that that's not a word, but maybe it should be a word, because as we think about this rising cohort of decision makers, they've essentially grown up in this tech native space. In the study we did together, Jason, we've said this is the first LinkedIn generation. They've grown up essentially having LinkedIn and tools like that and apps at their fingertips. So when you think about the coming of age, these are folks that are able to stand on the corner and book a taxi and have it arrive in 3 minutes. They're buying, they're conscious consumers buying clean, they're streaming music, they're on Peloton and other like this is like, you think about the way that they think, and there's an expectation because of that there be that seamless flow when you think about the UX that we should be looking at for B2B. You think about the ease, you think about the fun, the edutainment sort of aspect, and the digital first and smartphone first and AI powered decision-making support. This is where B2B needs to move. And that's where I think that we could learn a lot from B2C in sort of facilitating these types of buying experiences and overall ways to connect, even as we sell. I think there's a lot of work to do there. And I think if platforms actually don't keep up with that disruption, that it'll be a challenge to continue to compete. So we need to start to replicate this consumer experience and these lifestyle sort of experiences.
Definitely. And one thing that came through in our research was people buying things online that they'd never previously considered to do in that space, or people who had never engaged with e-commerce previously, having to do it out of necessity, but then deciding, actually, this is a pretty good thing. I'm going to carry on doing this more frequently once things get back to normal, whatever that looks like for us. Andy, what do you think this means for social platforms? And I guess the $1 million question, what's next in social selling?
Sure. So first of all, yeah, we are living, well, we will be living very soon in a 50-50 world. So 50% e-commerce, 50% physical commerce. You know, your data from it was Q2, your Q2 data. So I haven't looked at the latest run yet, but you know, 53% of German consumers are saying they prefer to shop online. We look last year, 2019, something like 10% of people during the Black Friday period, Q4 period, were ultimately buying online. That's a massive, massive, massive shift. So I think what we've started to see is a spectrum of shopping through kind of social platforms. We've got, you know, first kind of in-store shopping, which is basically using dynamic advertising, using APIs, partnering with someone like a Facebook marketing partner, where you can basically inform customers when the store is less busy. Again, for those people who might be older, who might be more ill, potentially with other occurring illnesses, that really, really helps them. Then there's things like click and collect, curbside pickup, where you have the opportunity where you can buy online and you can pick up in store. So that's something that we've seen, you know, in terms of innovation from social commerce in the last year or so. We've also got the kind of final mile through a number of different partnerships. That could be through takeaway.com, Liverandu, Shopify, whatever. I mean, that's about you know, getting people to buy via social and getting contactless or home delivery. And yeah, you mentioned in your report around live shopping, looking at you know, Singles Day 11/11 in China, and seeing how we in the West can kind of replicate that model. With Facebook, we started to test that more recently with people like Kylie Jenner. In terms of what's next, I think for me, this really misses the kind of biggest opportunity in a way of social commerce. If we think about Amazon, or we think about search, the internet has been really, really good at giving us what we already want, okay? Historically, it hasn't been very good at giving us what we might like. And I think if we think about what's next, the future, I think that the idea of the power of predictability, this kind of engineered serendipity between social, mobile, commerce is a really interesting concept. I think the problem we have right now is that we have an infinite amount of choice. We've talked about the Netflixification of the world. So, be that movies, be that, Spotify with music, be that lifestyle content with potentially Instagram. And with products, we only have a finite amount of time. So ultimately that moment of prediction, knowing what people want before they know what it is now really, really important. And it's a massive, massive shift. I think ultimately algorithms that are ultimately empowering the consumer journey, they're shortcutting that decision making. So for example, Lidl, a German supermarket, or Sainsbury's in the UK, they could potentially use algorithms to predict shopping based on your lifestyle. So if you want to lose weight, or, we talked about environmental impact, or, we want to be environmentally friendly with a vegan diet, Lidl in theory could dispatch personalized grocery automatically based on your previous lifestyle, your previous behavior, and then delivered through algorithms. So I'd say that, in the early 2000s, we saw the rise of e-commerce as the disruptor. I'd argue that the next thing, and the next big thing in 2021, the new trend is algorithmic or discovery commerce. I think could really redesign the retail landscape and really help people discover products by using the power of prediction.
It's interesting because that prediction will terrify some and excite others beyond belief. The thought of algorithms choosing those or making those decisions for you. Listen, I want to thank you all for your time today. We're at the end of our time, so I'm going to wrap up now. But I think it's been encouraging that in the midst of this horrible pandemic, a lot of our conclusions are that it's either forcing companies to do better or it's encouraging innovation. And if you have to look for silver linings to the many clouds that have hung over us this year, I think those are good ones to look at. For anyone who wants to read more about the stories that we have covered today, or look at the other themes which we touched on in the report, including things like mental health and sustainability, as I said, you can go to the GWI website and download the report for free. Ty, Devon, and Andy, I want to once again say massive, massive thank you on behalf of GWI for spending some time with us today. It was really interesting to hear your thoughts on and perspectives, and we're really grateful for your time. Thank you everyone for watching, and we hope you enjoy the report. Thanks.